The hotel manager didn't hesitate. He looked Jonathan Roumie up and down, frowned, and made his decision in seconds. "This hotel is private," he said sharply. "You need to leave. Now." The lobby fell quiet. Guests sitting on velvet sofas glanced up from their phones. A bellboy froze mid-step. Someone near the entrance whispered, "Did he just say that out loud?" Jonathan Roumie stood there calmly, his hands relaxed at his sides. No anger. No argument. No raised voice. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding," he said gently. "I have a reservation." The manager laughed, not politely, but loudly enough for others to hear. "A reservation?" he scoffed. "This is a luxury hotel, sir. We host world-class guests, celebrities, and dignitaries. Not people who wander in hoping for special treatment." Jonathan didn't respond right away. He simply nodded, as if he'd heard words like these before. But the manager wasn't finished. "I don't want problems tonight," he continued. "So I'll say this once, take your bag and leave, before security escorts you out." A heavy silence followed. Some guests looked uncomfortable. Others watched with curiosity, sensing drama. A few even lifted their phones, quietly recording. Jonathan took a slow breath. "Respect," he said calmly, "is not about where you stay. It's about how you treat people." That only irritated the manager more. "This is not a lecture hall," he snapped. "And I don't have time for moral speeches." Then he pointed toward the glass doors. "Out." Jonathan glanced around the lobby one last time, at the chandeliers, the marble floors, the people watching without speaking. He adjusted the strap of his bag and turned toward the exit. What no one in that lobby realized was this. In less than 10 minutes, the very same people who watched silently would be watching in shock. The manager, who felt powerful at that moment, would soon feel smaller than he ever had before. And the man they had just dismissed as unimportant was about to become the most significant person in the building. Because Jonathan Roumie wasn't just another guest. And kicking him out was the biggest mistake that luxury hotel would ever make. The Grand Imperial Hotel prided itself on being more than just a place to stay. It was a symbol of status. From the moment guests stepped inside, they were meant to feel important. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished marble floors. Soft music floated through the air, blending with the faint sound of footsteps and hushed conversations. Every detail whispered wealth, exclusivity, and power. At the center of it all stood Manager Lewis. Lewis had been running the hotel for 5 years, and in his mind, that made him untouchable. He walked through the lobby with his shoulders back and chin raised, scanning the room like a general inspecting his troops. His tailored suit was always pressed. His watch caught the light every time he lifted his hand, a subtle reminder to everyone around him that he was in charge. He believed luxury was not about comfort, it was about control. "Attention to detail," he snapped at a young concierge adjusting a flower arrangement. "Do you think high-class guests want to see crooked roses?" "Yes, sir," the concierge muttered, quickly fixing it. Lewis smirked and moved on. He enjoyed moments like that. To him, authority meant being seen, being feared, and never being questioned. It was shaping up to be a smooth evening. The hotel was nearly full, and an exclusive charity gala was scheduled for later that night. Important donors, event organizers, and public figures would be arriving soon. Lewis had personally reviewed the guest list and made it clear to the staff that only the right people were to be treated with special attention. Then the lobby doors opened quietly. No announcement. No flash of cameras. No bodyguards pushing through first. Just a man stepping inside. Jonathan Roumie. He paused for a moment, taking in the surroundings, not with awe, but with quiet observation. He wore a simple jacket, slightly worn at the edges, jeans that had clearly seen travel, and comfortable shoes. There was nothing flashy about him. Nothing demanding attention. And yet, there was a calm about him that felt deliberate. Jonathan adjusted the strap of his small travel bag and walked toward the front desk. He waited patiently as a guest ahead of him finished checking in, offering a polite smile to the receptionist when it was his turn. "Good evening," he said warmly. "I have a reservation under the name Jonathan Roumie." The receptionist began typing, her expression neutral and professional. But before she could say anything, Manager Lewis appeared beside her. He glanced at Jonathan once, not carefully, not thoughtfully, but quickly, dismissively. His eyes swept over the worn jacket, the lack of luxury accessories, the absence of anyone accompanying him. Lewis didn't like what he saw. "This counter is currently very busy," Lewis said sharply. "Are you sure you're in the right place?" Jonathan met his eyes calmly. "Yes, I'm quite sure." Lewis raised an eyebrow. "And you claim to have a reservation?" "Yes," Jonathan replied. "I booked it weeks ago." Lewis let out a small laugh, the kind meant to humiliate rather than amuse. "Sir," he said, lowering his voice but not enough to hide the contempt, "this hotel hosts executives, celebrities, and international guests. We don't usually accept casual travelers." Jonathan didn't take offense. He didn't defend himself. He didn't name his profession or mention his work. He simply said, "Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity." That was the moment Lewis decided he didn't like him. "I don't have time for this," Lewis snapped. "Cancel whatever plans you think you have here and move along." The receptionist hesitated, glancing at the computer screen. "Sir," she said quietly, "there is a reserva." Lewis raised a finger without looking at her. "I'll handle this." Jonathan noticed the discomfort on the receptionist's face. He offered her a gentle nod, not as reassurance, but as understanding. "I don't want to cause trouble," Jonathan said. "I only want to check in." Lewis straightened his jacket and smiled thinly. "Trouble," he replied, "is exactly what you're causing." Around them, the lobby had begun to notice. Guests slowed their conversations. A bellboy lingered nearby, pretending to organize luggage while listening closely. There was something tense in the air. The quiet before a confrontation fully reveals itself. Jonathan stood still, calm as ever. What Lewis didn't know, what no one in that lobby knew yet, was that Jonathan Roumie wasn't there by accident. He wasn't a nobody hoping for luxury. He was the guest of honor for the night's most important event. Invited personally. Respected globally. Admired for his character far more than his fame. And within minutes, the truth would walk through those same glass doors. When it did, the illusion of power Lewis clung to would shatter completely. The lobby felt different now. What had once been filled with quiet luxury and casual conversation was slowly turning heavy, as if the air itself had thickened. People could sense something unfolding, the kind of moment that made strangers pause and pay attention. Manager Lewis stood firm behind the front desk, his posture stiff with authority. He folded his arms and stared at Jonathan Roumie as though daring him to challenge the decision. "Well," Lewis said impatiently, "I don't have all night." Jonathan remained where he was, calm and unmoved. "I'm not here to argue," he said softly. "I only asked to check in." Lewis scoffed. "That's the problem," he replied. "People like you always think rules bend for them." Jonathan tilted his head slightly, not in offense, but in quiet curiosity. "Rules," he said, "are meant to guide behavior, not excuse disrespect." That sentence struck something in Lewis. Not guilt. Not reflection. Anger. "You're starting to irritate me," Lewis snapped. "This is a five-star establishment. Appearances matter here." Jonathan glanced down at his jacket, then back up. "If appearances matter more than character," he said gently, "then something is deeply wrong." A few guests exchanged uneasy looks. Someone near the elevators whispered, "This is getting uncomfortable." Lewis slammed his hand lightly on the counter. "That's enough," he said sharply. "You're not checking in. And frankly, I don't believe you ever had a reservation." He turned to the receptionist. "Pull it up," he demanded. "Let's expose this nonsense." The receptionist swallowed and turned her screen slightly. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. "I already checked, sir," she said carefully. "There is a reservation under the name." Lewis cut her off. "Fake bookings happen all the time," he barked. "Anyone can type a name into a system." Jonathan didn't interrupt. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched. Louis leaned closer to the receptionist and whispered harshly, "Cancel it." Her eyes widened. "Sir, it's a confirmed suite. Fully paid." Louis straightened slowly. Then he laughed. A loud, mocking laugh that echoed through the lobby. "Well, isn't that creative?" he said. "Now you're pretending to have money too?" Jonathan finally spoke again. "Money," he said, "has never impressed me." That was the wrong thing to say. Louis's face tightened. "Listen carefully," he said. "I've worked in luxury hospitality for decades. I know exactly who belongs here, and who doesn't." He signaled toward the security desk with a sharp nod. 2 guards began to move. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A bellboy took a step forward, then stopped. A guest near the lounge muttered, "This feels wrong." Jonathan noticed the movement but didn't react with fear. "I won't resist," he said calmly. "But I won't pretend this is right either." Louis smirked. "Good," he said. "Because I don't tolerate scenes." Jonathan reached into his bag and removed a folded document. "This," he said, placing it gently on the counter, "is my confirmation." Louis glanced at it without touching it. "I don't need to see that," he said dismissively. "I've seen enough." With deliberate contempt, he slid the paper back toward Jonathan and off the counter. It fluttered to the floor. A collective breath was held. Jonathan looked down at the paper, then back at Louis. "Someday," he said quietly, "you'll understand that how you treat people defines you far more than where you work." Louis waved his hand. "Save the philosophy," he snapped. "Security, escort him out." The guards stepped closer now. Jonathan bent down, picked up the paper, and folded it carefully. His movements were slow, respectful, almost ceremonial. He looked around the lobby one last time. Not with anger, not with humiliation, but with sadness. "Thank you," he said to the receptionist, "for trying." Her eyes filled with regret as he turned away. Jonathan walked toward the exit as whispers followed him. "That's unbelievable. He didn't even do anything wrong. Who does that manager think he is?" Louis exhaled, straightening his jacket. "Back to work," he ordered loudly, trying to restore control. "Some people just don't know their place." The glass doors opened. Jonathan stepped outside into the night. Louis didn't know it yet, but the moment Jonathan crossed that threshold, the balance of power began to shift. Because, within minutes, the people Louis had spent years trying to impress were about to arrive. And when they did, they wouldn't be asking who Jonathan Roumie was. They would be asking why he had been treated like this. For a moment after Jonathan Roumie walked out, no one spoke. The lobby, once filled with soft music and polite conversation, sat frozen in an uneasy silence. The glass doors slowly closed behind him, muting the sounds of the street outside, but the tension he left behind lingered like a shadow. A woman near the lounge shifted uncomfortably in her seat. "That didn't feel right," she whispered to her companion. The receptionist stared down at the counter, her hands trembling slightly as she pretended to straighten papers that didn't need arranging. She replayed the scene in her mind again and again. The reservation on the screen, clearly confirmed, fully paid, marked VIP. She had seen that word, VIP, and yet she had said nothing more. Manager Louis cleared his throat loudly, breaking the silence. "All right," he announced, clapping his hands once. "Show's over. Let's keep things moving." But things didn't move. Guests continued to stare. Whispers spread like cracks in glass. "Did you see how calm he was? He didn't even raise his voice. Why would someone like that be thrown out?" Near the concierge desk, an older staff member frowned deeply. He had worked at the Grand Imperial for over 20 years and had seen many types of guests, wealthy, famous, powerful, but very few carried the kind of quiet dignity Jonathan had shown. Something about it unsettled him. Outside, Jonathan stood beneath the hotel's glowing entrance lights. He set his bag down beside him and took a slow breath, looking up at the building. There was no anger in his expression, only reflection. He checked his phone briefly. No missed calls. No messages yet. Inside, Louis paced behind the desk, trying to shake off the strange discomfort crawling under his skin. He told himself he had done the right thing. Appearances mattered. Standards mattered. And yet, "Sir," the receptionist finally spoke, her voice low. There was a confirmed reservation under his name. Louis stopped pacing. "I told you," he said sharply, "anyone can fake a booking." "But the payment cleared," she said carefully. "And the notes said." Louis cut her off with a glare. "I don't want to hear about it." Just then, the revolving doors at the entrance began to spin again. A group of sharply dressed men and women entered the lobby, their presence instantly commanding attention. They didn't look like ordinary guests. Their posture, their focus, they moved with purpose. One of them glanced around the lobby, confusion crossing his face. "Is he here yet?" he asked quietly. Louis immediately straightened, sensing importance. "Good evening," he said smoothly, stepping forward. "Welcome to the Grand Imperial." The man barely acknowledged him, scanning the room again. "We're here for Jonathan Roumie," he said. "He was supposed to arrive earlier." The receptionist felt her stomach drop. Louis blinked. "I'm sorry, who?" The man turned fully toward him now. "Jonathan Roumie," he repeated. "Our guest of honor." The lobby seemed to shrink. Louis laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake," the woman beside the man said firmly. "He's the keynote guest for tonight's charity gala." Another executive stepped forward. He should already be checked into the presidential suite. The words landed like a blow. The receptionist's face drained of color. The older staff member's eyes widened. Guests leaned forward in their seats. Louis felt a sudden tightness in his chest. He was just here," the receptionist said quietly. The executives turned toward her instantly. "What do you mean was?" She swallowed. "He was asked to leave." The silence that followed was deafening. Louis's mouth opened, but no words came out. "Asked to leave," one executive repeated slowly. "By whom?" Every eye in the lobby turned toward Louis. His confidence cracked. I was only maintaining standards," he stammered. The lead executive's expression hardened. "Get him back," he said coldly. "Now." Outside, Jonathan picked up his bag as headlights swept across the entrance. A black luxury vehicle pulled up to the curb. The door opened. "Mr. Roumie," a voice called urgently. "We've been looking everywhere for you." Jonathan turned calmly. Inside the hotel, panic began to spread. Because in that moment, everyone understood the truth. The man they had watched walk out quietly was the very person the hotel had been waiting for all night. And what came next would expose every mistake made in that lobby. The black luxury vehicle idled at the curb, its headlights casting long beams across the hotel's grand entrance. The driver stepped out first, adjusting his suit, followed by two well-dressed executives whose urgency was impossible to miss. "Mr. Roumie," one of them called out again, scanning the entrance. "There you are." Jonathan turned calmly, his expression unchanged. "We were worried," the man continued. "You weren't answering your phone. The event is about to begin." Jonathan offered a polite smile. "I was just told I wasn't welcome inside." The executives froze. "What?" the woman beside him asked sharply. "That's impossible." Inside the lobby, through the glass doors, Manager Louis watched the interaction unfold. His heart pounded as recognition finally slammed into him, not a vague suspicion anymore, but a horrifying certainty. The man he had dismissed. The man he had humiliated. The man he had forced out. That was Jonathan Roumie. The doors swung open as the executives rushed inside with Jonathan walking between them. The lobby seemed to hold its breath. "Sir," one executive said loudly, "we sincerely apologize for the confusion." Guests stood. Phones were raised openly now. Staff members stared in stunned silence. Louis stepped forward, his confident posture gone. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said quickly, forcing a smile. "We didn't realize." Jonathan raised a hand gently. "It's not about realizing who someone is," he said calmly. "It's about how you treat them before you know." The words landed harder than any accusation. The lead executive turned to the receptionist. Is his suite ready? She nodded quickly. Yes. The presidential suite. Lewis's face drained completely. Presidential, he whispered. Yes, the executive replied, not looking at him. Reserved personally. Fully paid. Requested privacy. Jonathan glanced around the lobby, at the guests who had watched silently, the staff who had wanted to speak but didn't, and finally at Lewis. I came here for a charity event, Jonathan said. One focused on dignity, compassion, and humility. The irony was painful. Lewis swallowed hard and stepped closer. His voice shook. Mr. Roumie, I'm deeply sorry. I didn't know who you were. Jonathan met his eyes steadily. That, he said softly, is exactly the problem. Lewis's knees weakened. He reached for the counter to steady himself. I was only trying to protect the hotel's image, he whispered. Jonathan replied evenly. An image built on judgment isn't worth protecting. The executives exchanged looks. The lead one turned to Lewis. Step aside, he said firmly. Lewis obeyed without argument. One of the executives addressed the room. We want to be very clear, he said. This hotel does not represent our values when behavior like this occurs. Murmurs rippled through the lobby. Jonathan turned toward the receptionist, the young woman who had tried to speak earlier. Thank you, he said warmly, for doing your best. Tears welled in her eyes. The older staff member lowered his head, ashamed he hadn't intervened. Lewis finally spoke again, his voice barely audible. Please, give me a chance to make this right. Jonathan paused. For tonight, he said, the right thing is honesty. He turned to the executives. I don't want an apology dinner, Jonathan continued. I want accountability. The executives nodded. That will be handled, one said firmly. Lewis's fate was sealed in that moment. As Jonathan walked toward the elevator, the lobby parted instinctively. The same people who had watched him leave quietly earlier now watched him pass with awe. The doors closed behind him. Lewis stood frozen, surrounded by whispers and judgment, stripped of authority in the very place where he had abused it. Outside, the gala guests continued to arrive. Inside, the truth echoed louder than any announcement. Power does not come from titles or uniforms. It comes from character. And character had just walked back into the building. Not to demand revenge, but to demand respect. The elevator doors closed softly behind Jonathan Roumie, carrying him upward toward the presidential suite. Inside the lobby, however, the silence he left behind was anything but peaceful. Manager Lewis stood motionless near the front desk, his shoulders slumped, his confidence completely gone. The same space where he had once barked orders now felt unfamiliar, hostile, even. Staff members avoided his eyes. Guests whispered openly. The lead executive turned to him slowly. Lewis, he said, his voice measured but firm, we'll need to speak privately. Lewis nodded, swallowing hard. Yes, of course. They moved into the glass-walled conference room overlooking the lobby. The transparency felt deliberate. Nothing hidden, nothing softened. You made a decision tonight, the executive continued. And that decision reflects on all of us. Lewis tried to explain. I was protecting standards. We can't let just anyone. The executive raised a hand. Standards are not about clothing, he said. They're about conduct. Lewis lowered his gaze. We reviewed the footage, another executive added. Every word. Every gesture. Lewis's face burned. You dismissed a confirmed guest, the lead executive said. You overruled staff. You humiliated someone publicly. I didn't know who he was, Lewis whispered again. The executive leaned forward. And you shouldn't have needed to. The conversation ended quietly, without shouting or drama. When Lewis walked out of the room moments later, his role was already over. He handed in his access card and keys at the desk where he had once ruled. No announcement was made. No spectacle. Just accountability. Meanwhile, upstairs, Jonathan stood near the window of his suite, looking out over the city lights. The room was beautiful, elegant, spacious, designed to impress, but it wasn't what occupied his thoughts. A soft knock came at the door. It was the older staff member from the lobby. "Mr. Roumie," he said respectfully, "I wanted to apologize. I should have spoken up." Jonathan smiled gently. "Courage often comes with regret," he said. "But you're here now. That matters." The man nodded, visibly relieved. Later that evening, Jonathan descended to the ballroom for the charity gala. The atmosphere was warm, filled with laughter, music, and generosity. When he stepped onto the stage, the applause was genuine, not just for his fame, but for the calm dignity people now recognized. He spoke briefly. "Tonight isn't about me," Jonathan said. "It's about remembering that kindness is not optional. It's essential." Many in the audience glanced toward the hotel staff standing along the walls. The message landed. After the event, the receptionist approached him nervously. "Sir, thank you," she said, "for standing up without being cruel." Jonathan nodded. "Strength doesn't need cruelty," he replied. By morning, changes were already underway at the Grand Imperial Hotel. Staff training was scheduled. Policies were reviewed. A new interim manager was appointed, someone known for fairness, not fear. Lewis left the building quietly, carrying nothing but a small box of personal items. No one stopped him. No one mocked him. He had learned the lesson the hardest way possible. Jonathan checked out later that day. As he walked through the lobby one final time, the staff stood a little straighter, not out of fear, but respect. Outside, he paused and looked back at the building. Not with triumph. Not with resentment. But with hope. Because the real victory wasn't watching someone fall. It was watching a place learn. By the time Jonathan Roumie's car disappeared down the quiet morning street, the Grand Imperial Hotel looked exactly the same as it always had. The marble floors still shined. The chandeliers still sparkled. Guests still came and went. But something inside had changed. Not because someone famous had walked through the doors. Not because a manager had been dismissed. But because a truth had been exposed, one that could no longer be ignored. Respect is not a reward. It is a responsibility. Too often, people believe kindness should be reserved for those who look important, dress expensively, or carry visible status. We are taught, subtly and sometimes loudly, to measure worth by appearance, wealth, or influence. That night proved how fragile that belief truly is. Jonathan Roumie never raised his voice. Never demanded recognition. Never threatened consequences. He didn't win by overpowering anyone. He won by remaining who he already was. Calm. Grounded. Human. The manager believed authority gave him the right to judge. But authority without empathy is just control wearing a uniform. True power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't humiliate. It doesn't test people to feel superior. True power listens. It pauses. It treats everyone the same, even when no one is watching. That is why the moment mattered. Because it could have gone differently. Jonathan could have revealed his identity immediately. He could have corrected the manager publicly. He could have forced respect through status. But he didn't. He allowed character to speak louder than credentials. And in doing so, he gave everyone in that lobby a mirror. A mirror that asked a difficult question. How do I treat people when I think they have nothing to offer me? The answer to that question defines more than careers or reputations. It defines who we are when convenience, fear, or pride tempt us to be less than our best. The young receptionist learned that trying to speak up still matters, even when your voice shakes. The staff learned that silence can be as loud as cruelty. The guests learned that comfort does not excuse indifference. And the manager learned something far more painful than embarrassment. That respect demanded is never respect earned. But this story isn't about punishment. It's about choice. Every day we step into moments just like that lobby. Moments where we decide whether to judge or understand, dismiss or listen, elevate ourselves or lift someone else. Most of the time, no cameras are recording. No executives rush in. No dramatic reveal follows. And that's exactly when our choices matter most. Because the person you overlook today could be the one who teaches you tomorrow. The person you silence could be the one who shows you grace later. And the person you treat kindly, without reason, without reward, might never forget it. In the end, luxury fades. Titles change. Positions disappear. But character stays. So the question isn't, who deserves respect? The question is, who are you when respect costs you nothing? If you believe humility is real strength, if you believe kindness is a form of power, and if you believe people should never have to prove their worth to be treated with dignity, then carry that belief with you. Into your workplace. Into your conversations. Into the moments where no one is watching. Because that's where real stories are written. And sometimes, the quietest lesson is the one that stays with us the longest.